Good. And as you know, the meeting will be recorded as well, so that it will be published in the LPSA a website, and also it is used for the purposes of developing like blog posts and then for general knowledge sharing. So and also everyone can come back to this to the website to download also the presentation, so you don't need to try to keep notes of things, but just keep track of the interesting conversations. Think of questions that you would like to discuss with the presenters, and so on. So yeah, all the resources will be published in the website. Yeah, and I think we can start, and colleagues are continuing to join us, but I think it's good that we start with the discussion. Thank you everyone for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for making time and join us in this third meeting for this year of the Subnational Finance Working Group of the Local Public Sector Alliance. Most of us, we know each other, but there's also some new colleagues that are joining us from time to time. So a welcome to those of you that joined these meetings for the first time. And also please feel free and comfortable to raise questions and propose and make your proposals for discussions in this meeting. As I mentioned, this is the third meeting, and this time we will look at the fiscal decentralization outlook in Europe. Marina just shared information. Just shared information on the working group website of the LPSA, where you can find resources and more information about the group, the speakers, previous meetings as well, and resources for the previous meetings. But as I mentioned, today we will speak about fiscal decentralization outlook in Europe. And I'm very happy to have with us today a stellar panel of experts representing different institutions. We have today with us Marine from the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, CMR. Marine does a great job at the CMR, and then one of the things that she does is focusing on local finance, and she's one of the coordinators as well of the CMR working group on local finance as well. And Marine will speak today, and she'll share with us today what are the general trends in Europe when it comes to fiscal decentralization, but also what is the EU's budget for the next period. So, and what are the implication of the new proposed budget for European local and regional governments. We have also Monica. Monica is joining us from the Sigma program, an initiative funded by the EU and the OECD to promote good governance. And the OECD right now is also quite intensively focusing on multi-level governance. And Monica will share with us today insights about the Western Balkans in general as a region. And also we have one other speaker that will try to zoom in further when it comes to the Western Balkans. We have Vesna from the Center for Economic Analysis in Skopje, North Macedonia. Vesna, she's a seasoned researcher and will share with us the key developments of fiscal decentralization in North Macedonia. What are the most recent reforms and also the challenges ahead. And also we are lucky to have with us today also the perspective of the central government, and we've invited a colleague from the Ministry of Finance of Albania to serve as to be the discussant for our meeting, and Mr. Fran Bahimi. And he will basically serve as a discussant and consolidate the discussions, and also bridge the discussions with you as the participants of the meeting. And today with us are also, besides me, I'm introducing myself now as well. So I'm Elton Stafa. I work at NALAS, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the working group of on subnational finance of the Local Public Sector Alliance. Today with me is also Gundula and Titilola, who are my colleagues here, and also Marina, who takes care very much of our planning and also our activities. Without further ado, I would invite Marine to start the meeting. Thank you, Jamie, for joining us as well, and also for the congratulations. For those of you that don't know, Jamie Box, he's the executive director of the Local Public Sector Alliance and the mastermind behind this excellent network of practitioners. So thanks, Jamie, for the great work and also for the opportunity that you're creating for everyone to join in. And I see now that I switched the page, I see also some additional colleagues that have joined us. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Marine, so we go on what's happening in Europe and also how's the next EU budget looking up for local and regional governments in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elton. Can you confirm that you do see the slides correctly? Super. So I will start with just a few words of introduction.
Sorry, Marine, just one thing. Maybe you can put it as with the full screen option.
Full screen, right.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay.
Is the last one, the last option in the end.
Is it working now?
Now it's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect now. Thank you.
Super. So the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, CMR, it's the oldest and broadest associations of representing local and regional governments. Our members are not individual cities or regions, but we have 60 national associations that represent local and regional governments from 41 countries. So we go beyond EU member states. And through our national associations, we represent really the diversity of subnational governments. So from the smallest rural municipalities to big cities, regions, counties, provinces, and what have you. So we try to be representative of this richness and diversity in Europe. We have two main missions. The first one is, I would say, advocacy. So it's to inform our members about EU regulations that may have an impact on local governments, and on the other hand, raise awareness towards EU decision makers on this impact and this link between EU regulation, local level. And the second core activities, I would say, is exchange of knowledge, providing this space for discussion and exchange between our members, and notably through what we call expert groups. And so I'm personally in charge of two expert groups, one on territorial cohesion and the other one on local finances. And so today I will share with you some highlights from the discussion we're having in our expert group on local finance. As a disclaimer, I'm not an economist, so I'm sharing graphs from Eurostat and OECD for illustrations, but the message I will share are from the exchange we have with our member. So I would say that the first trend that we get from discussion with our members, is this overall a worsening of fiscal condition and an investment backlog in Europe. This is not uniform across Europe, and interestingly, we see that some countries that in the past faced financial difficulties, and I'm thinking about Portugal, it's actually now on a recovering trend, especially after the COVID crisis. Portugal is now looking at a more optimistic financial outlook, while some other countries, and I'm thinking about Germany and Austria, which are traditionally very strong economies, now our members in Germany and Austria are really raising the alarm that local governments in these countries are facing serious deficits and serious investment backlog. So yes, I just one point on this slide. I use a graph that shows also the share of how local governments are accounted in the general government debt, and that will be important maybe later in this presentation, because especially in EU member states there are these famous rules about the deficit and the debt. So it's important to know that in European context the local governments are accounted for in this rules and thresholds for debt and deficits. And therefore, we have seen actually in recent past in France, there was a project of budget from the national governments that, in order to align with the EU rules, actually constrain the capacities of local governments to invest. So I will come back to that in the later part on EU budget. Some other key messages are about the increasing dependence on transfer from central governments, and so a decrease of fiscal independence. So we talk about fiscal independence when the local governments can decide on what taxes to collect, and they receive directly the taxes. They can also decide on the rates and the tax bases. And actually, we see a overall trend that this independence is decreasing, and especially there is increased earmark transfer. So when the central government allocate transfer to subnational governments, they increasingly associate this with conditions on where to invest. So de facto decreasing the autonomy of local governments to decide how to allocate their revenues. And we also see this from EU level with EU grants. I also wanted to mention here that there are positive. We also have some positive examples of reforms that do contribute to increasing the share of local revenues or the independence. Again, I mentioned Portugal. There was a reform to increase the share of local revenues. And in Croatia, Slovenia, and North Macedonia, we also saw reforms to increase actually local government's control on income tax rates and shares. I think there is also growing consensus on the international community. I'm thinking maybe the OECD speaker will correct me, but the OECD is also contributing to this, saying that the property tax is actually a good, stable tax to ensure stable revenues for local governments. So I think there is sort of a trend going more and more in that direction to ensure that local governments can get revenues from property taxes. Another topic we've been discussing, and that relates to property taxes, recently the housing crisis is quite an issue in Europe. So we've been discussing recently with the expert group on the relation between the property taxes, including the taxes on vacant buildings and housings, and the role of local governments in providing social and affordable housing. We've also discussed some mega trends like the demographic change. Europe is an aging country, so you have this, I would say, scissor effect again between the growing demands for services in care for an aging population, and on the other hand, you have a reducing tax base. So that puts some local governments, especially in rural areas, in smaller municipalities, in a bit of a difficult situation. Another trend that we've been talking about is digitalization. It's not only about digitalization of public services, but also recently we've been discussing about the project of a digital euro, so a digital currency, and what could be the added value or the risks for local and regional governments. It's still a project, it's still being discussed, but it's something that we are following closely. Another topic I wanted to, yes, the last point I wanted to talk is the transition to my second part, is the worries about the future of EU budgets. So going into this, as maybe I will try to speak as if you're completely alien from the EU, because I understand this is a global audience. To put things into context, the EU budget is almost about 1% of EU's GDP. So it's actually small, but still it does contribute a lot to both public and private investments, and especially the EU cohesion policy. It has been really factor for development and investment for local and regional government in several member states. And I think that between 2014 2020, it represents, I think it's 13% of public investments in total EU and close to 50% of public investment in what we call less developed countries, but those are the countries that benefit the most of EU cohesion policy. So that's why it's important, and that's why we're looking very much at this new proposal. So the Commission just recently published a proposal for the budget, the long-term budget. It will start from 2028 to 2034, and basically it's a big change in how the budget is structured and what it will finance. So this is another way of showing. As you will see, there is we talk about headings. So the first heading is economic, social, territorial cohesion, agriculture, rural, maritime, prosperity, security. A lot of words, and it represents almost half of the EU budget. But knowing that in the current period, cohesion policy and agriculture that are there, that represent 2/3 of the budget. So already here we see quite drastic cuts in the traditional policies and budgets that do finance local and regional governments. On the other hand, we have a new heading that is called competitiveness, prosperity, security. That's really the new policy priorities for the EU, and that's where you see a lot of increase. And just on the right side, you see that the yellow part is also what the EU needs to repay the common debt that the EU has made to finance the recovery package after the COVID crisis. In terms of resources, as I said, the EU budget is relatively small when compared to the side of the Union because it's a contribution from member states. So every time the EU is trying to increase its own revenues, we already have the emission trading system, ETS, and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So these are two taxes on the price of carbon to limit carbon emission. And in this new budget, the EU has presented three new own resources. One is called TEDOR, so it's a tobacco excise duty, so a new European tax on tobacco products. Another one is called CORE, it's about corporate, I forgot the acronym, but it's a tax on companies that have an annual turnover of more than 100 billion euros. And the last new own resource tax would be a tax on e-waste, on non-collected e-waste. And here we are still trying to figure out whether that could have an impact on local governments, because some local governments are responsible to collect waste. And they also collect taxes to finance waste collection. So here we're trying to identify whether this could potentially reduce revenues of local governments. I will zoom in into some of the main parts of this budget. So this first heading, which also called national and regional partnership plans. Basically, what the European Commission did is to merge together very different policy priorities, which are currently and were in the past in different, really different budget line, I will say. So they had a dedicated budget. Now they are merged together this cohesion policy, so the policy that mostly contribute to regional development, together with agricultural policy, with internal security, border management, tourism, companies. So there is a lot there. So we have much more to finance with fewer budgets and also more competition between these policies. So it's now it will be up to the member states to decide freely whether they want to invest more on agriculture and less on regional development, whether they want to invest everything on one region or all regions. So this is what is worrying most local and regional governments in Europe, is that there is a lot of uncertainty, much less predictability with this proposal. And as I mentioned on this slide, these plans will also have to be linked with reforms and investments, and with these objectives of fiscal structural plan. So that's the slide I mentioned at the beginning, the level of debt and deficit. And that's where you see how local governments' powers to investments could also maybe be impacted there. On linking investment and reforms, I just wanted to mention this publication we did for CMR. So in Europe, we have this annual process that is the European semester, where the European Commission analyzes the economic and social policies of member states and makes some recommendations for reform. So basically what is in the proposal now is that what the Commission have suggested for member states to engage as reform should be part of their plans in exchange for fundings. What we show in this publication is that this reform clearly involve local and regional governments because of the many competence they have, but they are not consulted in this process. So this will be a room, a space where we would like to see an improvement in terms of multi-level governance. The second heading, so as I said, it's about competitiveness, but also defense, security. They are clearly the new priorities. Here we see both opportunities and risks. Opportunities because local and regional governments are clearly drivers of local economic developments and competitiveness at the local level. The risk is that this heading is completely separated from the first one and has no territorial dimension, territorial lens. And that's where we see a risk that all investments may be concentrated in the few already successful places, areas, regions. And so it will be actually contradictory to the objective of territorial cohesion. I will be very fast on that one because not so much an expert, but just to say that the third big part of the budget is about global Europe, and that includes also support to enlargement with the same logic of supporting investment and reforms in countries that wants to access the EU. And there is also quite a big part for supporting Ukraine reconstruction. So I will conclude here this presentation with what I mentioned. There is a lot of uncertainties now about the future long-term investment policy of the EU and how local and regional governments could still count on this policy, or whether they need to reorientate their, let's say, their aspiration from EU support towards more competitive grants oriented on competitiveness, innovation, development of industries and private companies. The uncertainty we have about the link with the reforms and how local and regional governments will be consulted in which reforms have to be part of the plans, and this risk of actually concentrating resources in few already successful areas. And that's the map I put there that shows that it's actually a trend that wealth and resources are concentrated in mostly capital cities, and as you see, quite in the middle of Europe. This is the final slide just to share some additional resources, because this will be shared online. So some publications from CMR, and also tribute to some OECD UCLG publications that are really helpful resources for our work. And with this, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marine, for this overview of what's going on in Europe, but also what are the key developments with the EU budget, and what the main concerns of local and regional governments are on the next EU budget. I mean, the highlight that I have from one of your slides is that there's worsening fiscal conditions and an investment backlog. And this is it's happening in Europe, in many EU countries, but this is also quite common in other development countries as well, and development context too. Thank you for this. You can write in the chat the link so that colleagues can reach out and then download publications that you shared. Now, I'd like to invite Monica to give us an overview, a snapshot of on the Western Balkans. And the key question is how we can make multi-level governance work in the Western Balkans. Thank you, Monica. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a second. Can you see the slides well?
Yes, we can
you
see
hear
it
me?
very well. Yes, we can hear
Okay,
you and we can see the slides.
Slides are okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation to Elton and to his team. And I'm representing Sigma program, which Elton already introduced, which is a joint initiative of OECD and EU, which has been working on public administration topics since 1992. And we are focusing on the EU candidate countries, also on EU potential candidates, but we are also providing support and advice to EU neighborhood countries. So this is more or less our regional sphere or reach. And today my focus will be a little bit different. I will be limiting my presentation to the institution and organizational side of multi-level governance, as this was what we agreed on. We are also dealing with the topic of fiscal decentralization, of course, and as you will see later on, I will share some of the publications which you can refer to. So today I would like to talk a little bit about our principles of public administration, and more importantly and practically about the assessments that we did for the first time also on multi-level governance in the Western Balkan administrations in 2024. So just to give you a very short introduction on the principles and the methodology to understand better how we work, we developed a set of principles for public administration which provide kind of basic standards of framework, and they combined EU acquis, OECD standards, and member country good practices into a common framework for reform or enhancement. And these serve as these principles serve as both as an accession tool and a diagnostic instrument for measuring how public administration functions. And for the first time, these principles were revised in 2024, and the first time we also included in this framework multi-level governance. Basically, Sigma works in 6 areas: strategy, policy development, public service, human resource management, organization accountability, service delivery, and public financial management. These 6 areas of public administrations are very still, and multi-level governance is embedded in 2 of these areas. So we have 2 principles in the 32 principles currently. And the aim is to help administrations enhance the reform initiatives and also kind of assess the administrations. As you all know, for us, multi-level governance it refers to the institution and financial interactions among and across levels of government. So in these principles, we are defining or we are setting standards for this interaction among the central, regional, and local governments. And we are not focusing on the functioning and on the assessing of local governments directly per se. We are more or less giving advice to and assessing the system set up by the central administration. That you will understand it better when I give you the results of the assessment from 2024. These multi-level governance principles are in line with the Charter, European Charter of Local Self-Governments. Of course, they keep the spirit of it, and they're built on key local government principles such as subsidiarity, fiscal decentralization. And to move on, the principles as a set of standards comes also with a very thorough methodology, assessment methodology that is also available online. And each principle has an indicator which kind of measures this principle, and it is broken down to sub-indicators and then to criteria. And just to give you an idea how robust this methodology is, it has more than 1,700 criteria, which we assess in each of the administrations in the areas that I presented before. For multi-level governance, out of these 1,700, it's around, I think, 100 criteria that we are assessing in each country. And it is to see to what extent the legal norms align with the practical implementation as well. The assessment is based on interviews, on questionnaires, the central administrations. We work with local experts, we work with institutions, non-governmental institutions, we work also with local government associations in the case of multi-level governance, but it also includes a set of questions, survey questions. Survey accounts for 8% of the criteria. It is interesting. It is perception data complement. It's perception data survey to citizens, civil servants, and businesses to understand and get a better picture of how public administration works in reality. I will skip through the principles, but just for you to see, these are the principles for multi-level governance in organization accountability and also in fiscal decentralization. And today my presentation will be focusing on the first principle on organization and institutions. I'm skipping the fiscal part, but I also invite you to check our website and see the results of the assessment, the methodology, to understand a little bit better how we assess the countries and how we kind of give a diagnosis on what the state of play is. Lastly, on this methodology, it is important to know that we are checking the legislation, the laws, the bylaws, and all applicable rules. But this accounts for less or around 50% of the whole methodology. The rest, 50% accounts to practice in implementation, to institutional setup, and also to more practical information. And this is very important to realize that sometimes countries score high in legislation, but then the overall score goes down because the practice is not in line with the legislation. And this is the case in multi-level governance. Going now to the more concrete findings of our assessment from 2024. This was the first assessment where we included multi-level governance, so more focus on the relations between the central and local governments, the system, the financial system, the interactions, the coordination, and cooperation. And as you can see, legally immersed Western Balkan countries have advanced frameworks. They score almost up to 90% in legislation, strategy, and institutions, counting from maybe 83 in Montenegro up to 90% in North Macedonia and Serbia. So the differences are not big. Laws are quite stable in the countries and very much in line also with the European Charter of Local Self-Government, with a few exceptions, of course. But when it comes to implementation and practice, as you can see, they lag behind, and they range from 32% to 55% in Albania, which brings the strongest results in implementation of these rules and laws. And this means that the institutional and organizational sides can be a lot of time well established in the countries, but when it comes to practice, especially in multi-level governance and how it works, the law can be strong, but there are weaknesses in practice. So this is what countries need to work on more, and it applies to all the Western Balkan administrations that we assessed. We also have a new report coming up on Armenia very soon, which will be presented in December, based on the same methodology. To get a little bit more on the regional context, multi-level governance, of course, is defined by a strong interaction of central, regional, local levels, and this is very important, not just for effective service delivery, for efficient public administration, and of course for strengthening local governance, but also for EU integration, as we are an organization which is trying to help advance countries with the integration process. We know from other sources as well, and a very good source for this is the local autonomy index in the Western Balkans, and which of course includes other countries as well, that despite initial progress, which took place mostly in 2010s, the pace of decentralization has stalled, and Western Balkan administrations continue to lag behind the EU average in local autonomy since then. So there hasn't been major reforms. Of course, we have a few territorial reforms in the past few years as well, but it hasn't had such a big impact on local autonomy itself. And we talk about local autonomy when it comes to responsibilities, but also when it comes to fiscal decentralization. The positive aspect of the local governments in the countries is the optimal sized local governments in most administrations. I will show you the next slide where you can see the EU comparison as well, or the EU average. As you can see, most of the Western Balkan administrations, especially Serbia, for example, have larger municipalities when it comes to the population size. There is only a little bit of fragmentation, but we are only talking about population size. We are talking about capacities, as there are still capacity differences among local governments, even though the sizes are bigger in EU comparison. And this is important to understand that that there are some tools how to, of course, help local governments, even without territorial reforms, to build capacities. And we will get to that because one of the key messages I would also like to convey is the importance of intermunicipal cooperation. Local governments also have very good, or at least have strategies and policies focusing on local government issues. The question is the implementation rate of these strategies and action plans. So even though there are strategies in place, the implementation rate of them are not perhaps that good as we would like to see, or that it is expected. And in general, administrative fiscal autonomy is in line with EU standards, but the key gaps, which I will repeat later on, but the key gaps for you to see is the narrow scope of competencies and responsibilities in policy areas, again, in comparison with EU peers. Also, fragmented central supervision with weak enforcement, limited coordination and consultation mechanism among the central administration and local governments, and as I mentioned, insufficient use of IMC intermunicipal cooperation practices. So jump to these maybe 3 or 4 topics, and excluding the fiscal decentralization or fiscal autonomy of local governments. As I mentioned, the law seems to be well in line with the EU standards and international standards, and this concerns also political autonomy or organizational autonomy of local government. But there are some limitations to each of that, especially in practical flexibility. So, for example, mayors, councillors are elected in direct elections. However, central regulations dominate the electoral procedures. So there are not really much flexibility in deciding on locally specific issues in elections. And the same concerns organizational autonomy. Some aspects still require central approval there is central government control, such as staff number. Salaries are set at central level. In some of the cases, employment plans need to be approved by the central administration, and there is also weak merit-based recruitment. Getting to the next slide, which is kind of one of the core elements of our assessment when it comes to one of the principles, when it comes to the organizational principle. And just this disclaimer, this is a comparison of competencies of local governments in the Western Balkan administrations and in EU countries, but only in EU peers, as we do not have the data to compare with all the EU countries. We actually sent out our questionnaire, which includes 15 service areas based on COFOG, and this questionnaire is more into depth. It does not only check whether local governments have responsibility in education or in for example, environmental issues, but we go a little bit more deeper. And in the questionnaire, we are checking whether local governments have policy discretion or only responsibility for delivering the service or delivering, ensuring the infrastructure. So the questions are in 15 service areas, and they're very concrete in each and every service area. And this is not something that we can compare because we don't have the data there for all EU countries, but we have 8 or 9 countries which we directly checked and we received information from. And to conclude, there still seems to be greater responsibilities of local governments in EU peers. For example, in Austria, Poland, Estonia, they often handle education and social services more extensively than in Western Balkans. I don't know what the result would be if we also included countries such as Denmark, Sweden, Norway, France. We usually have countries which are closer to the region, to the Western Balkan region, and also closer culturally, historically, in public administration to the Western Balkans. So perhaps it would be even worse, but for now, with these EU peers, we can say that still these peers have greater responsibilities than those in the Western Balkans. And some of these Western Balkan administrations stand out with the weak policy discretion in some of the service areas. What we see are the similar. Yes?
Monica, may I ask you to speed up a little bit?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
yes.
I will try to, but I think this is the main slide that I wanted to talk about. So the next ones I will just skip. We see similarities in technical and communal services, but we also see that even though they have competencies in some of the areas, there is limited policy discretion in some of them. So there is not much they can actually do in them. We also see some of the trends in Montenegro, for example. They are preparing asymmetric decentralization. This is present in Kosovo, for example. But one of the main issues is still the unclear division of competencies between the state and local governments. So skipping to the next slide, it's about improving oversight. And because of the time limitation, I will just point out that there are different oversight and supervision mechanisms in the countries. Generally, the main issue is the weak enforcement mechanism and also the fragmentation of oversight, no coordination and lack of data. So basically, this also doesn't have the local government functioning, which would also probably could benefit from better supervision of the state administration. Mostly the supervision is focusing on legality, but there are some cases when they're actually checking or it reaches us to expediency of local government decisions, which is of course not good. Going to another aspect that we are checking is intermunicipal cooperation. Very shortly, there are laws for intermunicipal cooperation, in some cases specific laws, but there is not really a coherent strategy from state administrations, not really financial incentives. And if there are intermunicipal cooperations that rely heavily on donor funding, exceptions are, for example, Serbia, which is a good example, which is trying to systematically change laws as well and finance intermunicipal cooperations. In practice, after gathering data on all intermunicipal cooperations, we can say that there is not really much intermunicipal cooperation going on in the Western Balkans. And this is despite the capacity differences among local governments. So we see a huge space for improvement here. Last but not least, the survey questions which we focused on local governments was citizen trust in local governments, which you can see in the graphs between 30 and 40%. So it is not extremely high, it is rather low. But the more varying factor is when we asked citizens about excessive central government interference in local issues, where there is a concern about this on average on 50%. So this also talks about local democracy and how people actually see local government's strengths and interactions with central administrations. There are some few good cases. You will have the presentation so you can read it for yourself. Also, so there are very good practices in each of the Western Balkan administrations. This is just a few that we enlisted. And thank you to my previous presenter, which she already shared the WOFI, which I also consider a very important publication on local government's data. We also managed to publish four papers. We only work on this area for the past 3 years, but we have 4 very important papers on multi-level governance. One is upcoming in 2020. It will be published very soon. And of course, besides that, our website has a plethora of dozens of publications on other issues, from human resource management to public procurement, audit, and so on. So you are invited to check out the website for any more information. And if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you, Monica, for this snapshot on multi-level governance in the Western Balkans, and also a brief presentation on what Sigma is doing and the publications that you have developed. I'm pretty sure that they will be useful to many of the colleagues joining us today. And also sorry for rushing you, but just the idea is that we need to manage the time so that we have enough time also for the discussions. But thank you. Now I'd like to invite Vesna from North Macedonia. We would like to zoom in on what's going on or what has been going on in terms of fiscal decentralization and regional development in North Macedonia. There are some interesting recent reforms, and we would like to, and we'll hear more about this from Vesna. Vesna, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Just to make sure that you're seeing the full screen presentation that I'm sharing.
The full
Okay,
screen,
great.
and we are hearing you loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for bearing with the last presentation. I hope I will be short, and I will present. Well, I intend to showcase the context for the case of North Macedonia in terms of decentralization and the regional development and the recent reforms. And I will very much confirm, I would say, with some of the highlights of the previous colleague, especially. Well, just for those that are outside of the happenings in the Western Balkan, a small reminder or information that the local government in Macedonia is structured on a one-tier system, as a one-tier system with 80 municipalities, and the city of Skopje, which is the capital, largest and encompasses 10 municipalities within. Well, the decentralization itself was implemented in two phases. It started in 2004 with earmark grants that did not include salaries, and then in two consecutive timelines, then they entered the second phase in 2007 and 2011. So all in all, over a decade and more, we are practicing, or we have experience with the decentralization in the country. However, important note, and I will stress this because it's important to the discussion following, is that all local government units have equal symmetrically assigned responsibilities, except for, let's say, the city of Skopje, which shares some of the competences and manages some of the competences and subsequently finances with the municipalities that is comprised of. Well, some competencies are decentralized. However, as the previous colleague mentioned, the sectoral and between governance level coordination is deficient, and we're not progressing. We have this as a persistent challenge. Well, in terms of size, the local government budgets in total are amounting around 5% of the GDP, which is maybe comparable to the regional peers in the Western Balkans. However, it is not. It is far from what is towards our. What is our strive towards the EU. The decentralization framework does allow for a certain degree of local autonomy for the municipalities to manage the resources and deliver essential services. However, a significant amount of the authority and the competences still remain, or on policy level, are concentrated at the central level. The challenges are enforced due to we have highly fragmented local government structure. We have different sized municipalities in terms of population. We have municipalities that also have below 5,000 people, a population of 5,000. We have large regional disparities, however, disparities and differences among the municipalities within the regions as well. is reflected in differences both in availability and quality of the local services. This is especially pronounced when it comes to comparing the urban and rural municipalities. Well, other challenges and say challenges or problems, as it is now more appropriate to name them, is that the allocation of competences for services is not linked with local institutional capacities, and the proper performance is not assessed, the service performance. The intergovernmental transfers as block grants are basically earmarked grants which are financing institutions rather than the functions, and therefore once there is a lack of fiscal capacity among the local government units, then here the intergovernmental transfers fill in this gap. When I want to back up the high dependence on the block grants and the transfers, basically, and also confirming what the first presenter, Marin, was saying, also it's a trend. Unfortunately, obviously, in the EU as well, is that basically around 2/3 of the revenues of the municipalities on average are transfers from the central government, while around 1/3 are also revenues, which are taxes, fees, and other charges. However, the disparities are evident because this is the average, but when we see it, for example, on a median level, this is around the on-source revenues around 22%, and the intergovernmental transfers around 74% of the revenues. And here comes now the question of and the challenges in the question of whether the decentralization is devolution or basically more the concentration, because it is more about it is less about building the fiscal autonomy and decision making on a local level. The voter preferences, therefore, are not easily translated into the budget. This is backed by a relatively low fiscal transparency, but significant low accountability. Also, the local elections, which reflect also the democratic level, let's say, is more focused on the national rather than local issues, which was once again proven by the local elections that just ended this weekend. Furthermore, the inadequate transfer of the financial resources for some of the services are forcing the local governments to inefficiently provide the services, and they are unable to maintain the depreciated assets rather than, and not even to discuss about creating new assets that will drive the local growth, which creates large fiscal gaps and fiscal stress for the municipalities. Of course, this is a general picture. There are good examples. However, there are also really struggling examples, which again comes to the focus of whether we need to concentrate and direct the discussion towards altering and making systemic changes that will deliver. Another interesting aspect is the fact that characteristic for Macedonia is that this decentralization as a public choice, as a policy, is very much in line with the political stability for national cohesion as a policy rather than economic efficiency. Just to note here that CEA as an organization during the couple of years ago when there was a discussion for and a plan for transfer of new competences, and these were considered. We did a research and to justify and to back up the need for considering asymmetrical decentralization. However, as you will see with the last highlight, is that the reforms are rather cosmetic changes in this area, so this has been put on hold. To back up on a regional development, I didn't mention before, Macedonia has the municipalities are divided in statistical regions for statistical purposes, 8 statistical regions, as it is one-tier government, subnational government level, and the differences are persistent. If we see, it is one thing to see the average, but we see the differences between the municipalities and the capital city of Skopje, and what huge difference there is between the fiscal autonomy, and within the municipalities, as I already mentioned, there are huge differences and capacities, especially pronounced among the urban and rural. It is worrying that the coverage ratio has a trend of the on-source revenues to the total expenditure is dropping, even if we ignore the COVID drop. And a bulk of the on-source revenues are from one-time charges along land development fees, land transfers, rather than property tax, which was another issue that was mentioned in the previous issue for debate, also mentioned from the previous speakers, which results with also unpredictable and unequally available resources for the local governments. What is recently a change, as I already mentioned, it is not a systemic change, but rather cosmetic. It was concerning the increasing of the financing of the local governments to increase their fiscal capacity through the vertical transfers. The personal income tax as a shared tax has the percentage has doubled from 2001 to 2004, from 3 to 2000 to 6 in 2024, and it has stopped here. As percentage of the total personal income tax collected, while the transfers in VAT, unlike the intended larger reform, it has been implemented as components through additional components to the general purpose transfers with equalization grant component and performance-based grant, on top of the 4.5 percentage points of VAT shared from 2002 to 2024. And again, this has, at this point, it will be stopped until further notice. The performance-based grants are basically are set up there to increase and motivate the local governments to increase their tax effort to collect the on-source revenues. And the equalization is for the poorest, let's say, municipalities to be pushed to the average. The capital transfers are also with their own challenges, as they are not systematized. They are very much fragmented, coming from different central budget users, and not linked with performance. Another change, let's say, is the new wave for regional development or balanced regional development, which was put in place with the new law and the new 10-year strategy in 2021. However, its intention is to be mirroring or to reflect the EU cohesion policies. Nevertheless, even the previous law had prescribed that 1% of the GDP needs to be dedicated for more balanced regional development. However, this is largely under-executed in the previous and also in this wave, let's say this decade. The disparities persist. Just for an illustration, Skopje planning region, where the capital is, the GDP in absolute terms is 9 times higher than the Northeast region as one of the lowest developed regions, or per capita 2.5 times. This is also in a context of population decline and out migration. I will not go into details with the figures. It is evident that that there is no significant decrease in the disparities. And I will also mention at the end just another research that we did. I believe last year this was also presented on this forum. The fact that the regions, the research, the paper tries to blend and to link the decentralization with the regional development, and there are some interesting findings, among which is that the regions in Macedonia do not tend to converge to a more stable long-term economic equilibrium, but also it is interesting to see that even if the local governments collect more money through taxes or other on-source revenues, it may reduce to a certain degree the inequality, but only if the region has enough economic activity, economic base to be able to be pushed towards generating growth. Therefore, the less developed areas should build their economic potential rather than transferring or having additional funds. And all in all, the conclusion is that even though the title is for the reforms, there are no significant systemic reforms in Macedonia when it comes to decentralization or regional development that significantly moves away from what has already been seen. There are also important, it is important to understand that the discussion from a couple of years ago for certain reforms has been put on standby, and some of the initiatives are further stalled, such as improving the capital transfer system, further increase of the transfers, other options for local revenues and local taxes, improving the criteria for the grants and putting there a more performance-based assessment, and of course other very much fiscally related changes that needed to be done, having in mind that also the municipalities persistently and continuously are faced with problems with increasing arrears. And also when it comes to the increased transparency, it was supposed to be triggered by the organic budget law, which year after year is constantly its implementation is being delayed. And to put it in a context with the previous speakers as well, and in the EU perspective as a candidate country, it is important to know that some of the changes that are already in place or are to be in place are very much conditioned conditioned by the EU growth plan for the Western Balkan and the EU reform agenda, which means they are not organic and do not come from within, which is also a challenge by itself to be tackled. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vesna. This was This was really, really informative about what's going on in or what is not going on in Macedonia. Depends on how you want to look at it. But we wanted to give also this detailed zoom in one of the countries in the region. In the Western Balkans, decentralization started in the 90s and then in the first 2000s with a strong push in the beginning, but right now we see a general stagnation in many of the countries in the region. And we saw, I mean, some of the highlights that you mentioned was fragmentation, disparities, dependence on transfers, which, I mean, depends also on how you look at it, but poorly designed transfers, that's a big problem as well. So thank you for this snapshot, Vesna, much appreciated. And also thank you for sharing the links to the publications that you have developed so that other colleagues can reach out to them. Now, we would like to hear the perspective of the central government. So, Fran, we hear about underfunded mandates. We hear about the Caesar effect, so increasing costs but declining revenue base. We hear about poorly designed transfer to regional inequalities, investment backlog, and coordination and cooperation between levels of government. What do you think about all this? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and to share my ideas and my perception about the local government, and special for the local finance. Is coming through good? Do you hear me? Okay. And I think the three presentations were very interesting, and I tried to reflect something from each presentation. Very, very interesting, the Marina presentation for the fiscalization outlook in Europe. We know, but Europe, especially the developed countries, are advanced than the other countries. And also the Monica is a very, very useful for us, but our region, the presentation added every detail, and I think it was very useful, especially for each country in the West Balkans. And also the Macedonia, it's a good case to learn from each other countries from the Western Balkan. We know all, but the European Charter has defined the obligation of each local authority to have enough, or let me say, the financial under the control, or the own financial, and this financial is a very useful. It's a very important to exercise its function every local governments in each countries, and also without the financial autonomy, the local governments will become, let me say, the extension of the central government, or extension of the agencies, and especially the Balkan countries, or I think the East Europe countries. I think in many cases happened this thing. And we know very well, but the developed countries has the more strong democracy and more strong local democracy, more local, let me say, the local autonomy, local financial autonomy. And also these countries, let me say, are more able to absorb the new function, let me say now the common function, the climate change and the other function related to the new technology, etc. And however, this group, the main challenges has to, this group, the main challenges has to increase the efficiencies of the using of the money. And this group, the size of the public, the local expenditure is 25 and to 30% of the public expenditure. I think we higher than the other countries, or if compare with the GDP, are 10 to 12 per GDP. Or if we look at the own revenues of this group, 20 and 15% of the total public revenues are locally. Or if we compare the GDP, 4 to 5% of this portion for the local governments. And in the next group, the East Europe countries, I think it's lower than this group. And this group again, it inherits the centralized governance and structural governance, and also the figures are lower than the first group. And if we see the average of the East Europe countries, 10 to 15% of the total public expenditure depends the local governments. If we compare the GDP per GDP are 6 or 7%. And if we can go to the Western Balkans, the figures are lowest, I think. For example, the Western Balkans spend average 5% of the per GDP the local expenditure. Albania is lower than this average, 3.5% per GDP. And if we compare the revenues, also the revenues are very low in the Western Balkan countries. And I identified in 2 or 3 things the Monica presentation, which is very, very useful, very typically for the Balkan area. And the legal framework, let me say, the legal framework and strategies, etc., are approved in, I think, all the Balkan countries, Western Balkan countries. But the implementation is the big problem. And it's right, the figures, the 55% of them are implementation or are implementing. This is a big problem, I think, for the Western Balkan countries. And if we can look at another slide related with the competences of the local governments, I have within this group we have different competencies. For example, Albania and some of the other countries, our neighbors, we don't have the full competencies. For example, for preschool education or prime health care, etc. That's why I think it was very interesting to see and to compare. And I think the EU through the directive or some the other measures can order or can order the Western Balkans countries to achieve some standards. And in most of my career, I worked in Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Local Governments, and also most of my careers I spent to the local finance. And however, my personality grow up through the local governments into the Ministry of Finance. And physically, I have been in Ministry of Finance, but in mentally and in totally I have been, and I play the role of the director of finance in one municipality or any clerks in municipalities. And if we can see something related to the central government, I think we have a lot of things to do. For example, in whole the legal framework in Albania and the other countries in Western Balkan countries, I think the whole legal framework has the cooperation between central and local governments. In letter, everything it's okay, but in practical, everything it's reverse or in the other side. For example, but the line ministries has years ago transferred to the local governments many function competencies, and when transferred to the local governments, nothing else happened with the line ministries or central government institution. But the local governments are alone to exercise or to exercise their function. And this is I think the weak point of our countries. I think not in West Balkan countries, but I think in Eastern Europe countries, it's a weak point, cooperation between the central and local governments, central governments and local governments. And the things that I wanted to share with you, it's related with the local financial autonomy, or the fiscal autonomy. The fiscal autonomy is very important for the local governments. And my experience, very often I try to interfere in the central government institution to be fair with the local governments when we decentralize the function. But I can declare, but in a few cases happened the transfer, the full, let me say, the full bill of the financial bill to the local government for the function that decentralized them. That's why I think for the local I think that for the European, I think the European Union should be more stronger. I think in the conditions for the local government to have to the government to have the local government more clear the function, more clear, or let me say the financial autonomy, and also I know, but I know we don't have any, for example, the absolute standards or any let me say any size. How will be the size, for example, the local government in Albania or Macedonia or in Serbia or Kosovo, etc. But I think the EU through the accession process can provide some, let me say, some benchmark. For example, 6% of GDP, the local expenditure should be like 6% of GDP, or local revenues should be, let me say, 2 or 3% of GDP, but should have some benchmarks to have the countries that all the countries in West Balkan countries have applied to become the member of EU, and also. In Albania, we have many challenges. The Ministry of Finance and the central government institution, especially the challenges are linked with the local governments. My perception, and I think that it will be necessary if we'll have, for example, special legal framework for coordination between central and local government. That I have a lot of manuals, a lot of guidelines, etc. But if we'll have, let me say, the one law, special law for the coordination or harmonization between the central and local government, I think will be useful for the local government and central government. And to be why I am saying for the law, but it's necessary to have the law to which will be, for example, the competencies of the central government and local government in the coordination aspects. And also, but it's necessary in Albania, we are revising the financial mechanism for the local governments. But Elton mentioned, happened many times, and we have many claims from the local governments for the financial, let me say, the financial bill. But to use, as the other countries, use the unconditional transfers for the local governments. But we have, let me say, the fiscal rules, but no less 1% of GDP we transfer to the local governments. But the local governments again claims to us, but they haven't enough money to exercise their function, and that's why through the public financial management strategy we put as a topic to revise the whole financial scheme for incoming years. Not so.
Thank you, Frank.
The time.
Yes,
two sentences.
The time.
Okay.
So
okay.
We're a little bit
and the other things
that
our challenges is we try to digitalization the whole financial operation of the local government. So we have the AFMIS. We try to digitalization of the local tax and fees collection administration, and also we are trying to refine again or to engineering the budgeting process in local government. If we'll democratization of the budgeting process, I think we'll encourage or empowering the local autonomy or local democracy in the local government. Thank you very much, and sorry for delay.
Thank you. Thank you, Fran. I know you have a lot of things that you would like to share with us, but unfortunately the time is very stringent, and we are ending up reducing the part for the discussion. But one of the things that you mentioned, it gave me a great idea for a topic for our next meeting, which can be platforms for dialogue and agreements on the financing systems for local governments. In Europe, there are quite some cases of models that can be useful. Thank you all to our presenters for the presentations and your contributions. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I would invite also other colleagues to think about it, and if there's a need, we can extend a few minutes. For those of us that can make it, we can extend a few minutes the meeting. So we have two questions for Marine from Gabor. Marine, I don't know whether you had time to check them in the chat, but basically the first one is, could you give a bit more information about the new taxes planned at the EU level? And what's how the debate on the direct local and regional government access to EU funds stand? So where are we standing basically in this titanic fight between the Commission and the Parliament? So
Yes, thank
you, Marie.
Thank you very much.
But very briefly, please.
I try. On the taxes that are proposed, I cannot say much more than what I just presented on the tax of on collection or non-collection on e-waste. It would be, the proposal is to have €2 per kilogram of non-collected e-waste, but they are all for discussion now, and some of them, including the tax on companies, they are controversial. So everything is up to discussion for member states, up to debate. This is the moment of negotiation. So that's why at the moment I cannot say much more. On direct finance to local governments, so the Commission proposal on this regard remains a bit on the current status, meaning that the main investment policies is done through shared management, so it has to go through the national governments, and then it can be implemented by regions in a decentralized way. There is, in this proposal, really a lot more of flexibility in terms of the governments will not be asked to allocate all their national envelope from the start, but they will have to plan some reserve in case of changing priorities or emergencies. And the Commission also has its own reserve, and through this there may be some direct funding through cities, but at this stage it's a bit unclear. And the other part of direct funds possibly for cities are the competitive grants under the Horizon call. I did wanted to react to some question on old resources and fiscal equalization. Just to say that in Europe also, even within the Union, we have very different systems. And you see that mostly Nordic countries, they have a higher share of revenues from taxes, while maybe more in the Eastern countries, they're much more dependent on transfer from the national governments. But there is one work that is really interesting from the Commission Joint Research Center on fiscal autonomy, where we see that the more you have fiscal autonomy for local governments, and especially when local governments can perceive tax on economic activities, the more there are incentives to create a business-friendly environment and actually increase your own revenue. So this study actually makes the case that you need fiscal autonomy to have more dynamic economies, which I found really interesting. And that's also a reason why we're not in favor of earmark transfer or earmark grants, and we believe it's more positive for the global economy to have more fiscal autonomy. And on equalization is the same. It's very different between different member states. Sometimes you have very complex calculation and maybe too complex. But here maybe I refer to OECD work where you can find really great publications. So that's the link to the next speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Marine, also for picking up on one of the other questions. This is much appreciated. We also have We also have another question about fiscal decentralization. Could you please share if there's any formula for equalization grants that consider fiscal capacity and expenditure needs? So this would be great support also for Nepal. So thank you for this question. Actually, I mean, if you look up these publications that are being shared, some of them they include detailed information also about the transfer systems in place. The report that we prepare at NALES, at least, it gives a snapshot of how the transfer formula works in Southeast Europe. So what are the main criteria? What is the logic behind the weights? And so on. So you can check it up there, and I'm sure that it will be quite useful. But also in the publication that were shared from Marine and also from Monica, publication from Vesna, you would find a lot of information that would be useful on how to design proper transfer system, or what are the main issues with the transfer system. And I see here also that Dario, our colleague from the Croatian Association of Cities, he already responded on how you could use transfers, how you could link transfers with the on-source revenue mobilization. And also, one of the objectives of the recent reform in Macedonia was about this performance grant that was introduced. The idea behind it is that they would like to push for more tax effort at the local level. Although, you know, the way in which things are designed, they have a great implication on the ultimate impact. It's a matter also of good quality and reliable data and so on. Any other question? You're welcome, Alexander. Thanks to you for joining us. I hope I didn't miss anything. Okay, we have another question from Charles. What ways are there in Europe that local government can enhance should it not to reduce dependency on central government transfers? So anyone would like to pick up on this? So, I mean, the charts on this, there's typically when the more responsibilities that local governments receive, or in particular in the social sector, like education, healthcare, and social care, for example, the more responsibilities they have in these areas, the more dependent they will be on national transfers. There's no way out of it. It's very difficult to have a difference. I mean, in general, in the Nordic countries, Marine mentioned as well, they're heavily reliant on personal income tax sharing, which is a special form of transfers, but it's a special form, you know, because they also charge their own rates in the Nordic countries and so on. So it's a little bit different over there. But elsewhere, the more local governments have responsibilities in these functions, the more dependent they would be. So in a way, the problem is not the increase in the share of transfers per se, but in the way in which the transfers are designed. So whether they are able to capture the spending needs, and then whether local government have sufficient autonomy within these transfers and so on. But this is me trying to respond to $1 million question in 30 seconds. This is a very relevant one, and perhaps we should have a more detailed, we should have another meeting dedicated to it. We have a stellar team here of experts and also other participants that could expand further on this question. So, colleagues, we are 1 minute above our timeline. We can take a few more minutes. So, if anyone from the audience would like to pick up on this question, I find it very interesting. So, if you would like to pick up on it, you're more than welcome to.
Ton, maybe I will a little bit, if that is okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you.
But just very shortly, because I think you said everything.
4 more minutes.
Okay, no. I think just 30 seconds. I just wanted to confirm that you said everything important. And one thing was not really heard think there is a little bit of a trend, maybe Marine actually referred to it a little bit, there is a little bit of trend of centralization in not only in some of the Western Balkan countries, but also in EU countries. And we can see that because of probably the state is trying to find other sources of financing because of the difficult economical times. So how I see is there is a little bit of centralization and not just of services, of course, of financing as well. So that is, I think, one interesting topic that may be interesting to discuss also in the following, because our assessment is saying something about local government autonomy, but I think in 1-2 years, maybe if you do the same assessment, or at least in 5 years, it will be showing a little bit of different trends. So I think that's interesting. But going back to the topic of how to kind of strengthen local government financial autonomies, as you said, the more competencies you give, or if you give competencies, the transfers. One way is to design them better, and as I think Marin said, is to design them in a more flexible way for local governments. So we are also, checking in our assessment whether grants or transfers are conditional or unconditional. So it is important to design the transfers from the state to local governments to be freer and not earmarked grants. So they're actually have flexibility to how to manage them. And of course, another ways which countries are looking into is how to increase own revenues of local governments. And then we talk about how to increase property tax by reforming the tax or improving the tax collection in these countries is one of the questions. Also increasing the share of local governments in personal income tax, as you said. But then one side is of reforming the tax and, for example, tax collection, which concerns mostly the countries in Central Eastern Europe. But then when we talk about increasing the taxes to increase own revenues of local governments, this is, of course, a very sensitive topic and also political in terms of local democracy and local governments. So there is a limitation to that as well. So I think a combination of well-designed transfers from the state, which does not want to control everything, but on the other hand has a good supervisory mechanism, and on the other hand also trying to strengthen local government's own revenues by not just increasing but also by collecting the taxes, by designing them better is. But as I said, I think an issue or a topic we could look into is really this centralization of services, of finances and so on. I think that could be a topic for the future too, because as Fran mentioned, and I wrote that down too, an interesting issue is that when it comes to integration, of course, the charter is the core element, but when it comes to some kind of basic benchmark standard, there is nothing. And of course, that is okay for the countries to decide on this issue from a political point of view. But then it is difficult to design this multi-level governance system and local government responsibility well. And as we know, for example, for integration, everybody says 70% of acquis is implemented at the local level. So we actually want to have strong, well-prepared local governments to be able to apply that. It's also in the interest of the EU to have strong local governments. And now I'm finishing because then I have just, thank you very much.
Thank you, Monica. This is very, very interesting indeed. But also, if I may complement what we've seen in a good part in the Western Balkans, in particular after the global crisis in 2009, was the reduction in tax powers of local governments. This was done in the name of enhancing the enabling environment for competitiveness, businesses, and so on. But the long story short was that this resulted in a reduction in local government revenues. And I don't know whether it resulted into an improvement of the environment for economic activity in the country as a whole, or in the countries as a whole. But the long-term consequence is that what used to be a strong local government tax in much of the Western Balkans is not there anymore. It used to be this local tax on local businesses. And this was reduced. Again, on the first question on how to reduce dependency on transfers, here definitely we could spend more than a session responding to this, but it's critical to focus as well on local government tax competencies. Here, and the property tax is one of the key elements that should be considered to improve. I mean, within this there's again different ways, different waves of thought. But at the end of the day, these are the typical instruments: local government taxes, the ability of local governments to tax their constituencies. So the framework should be flexible enough, and the local government should be provided with a diverse revenue streams. At least this is what it is sanctioned also in the European Charter on local self-government. With this, I'd like to thank you once again, everyone, for your time, and also the speakers for your presentations. This is a great place to be. Really, I appreciate the chance of getting together and then learning what's going on in different parts of the world. And also, this is a very open platform. So here, as Marina mentioned, we welcome proposals from your sides, dear participants, and to become contributors and speakers in our session. So if you have proposals on topics and also on concepts that you would like to present and join us in the conversation, you're more than welcome to do it. Otherwise, it's been very, very useful. Thank you very much. And you can find everything in the LPSA website, so presentations, recording, and also the links to the resources that we shared today. I encourage you to follow up with us on any point that you may have. Yeah, thank you very much once again.